Good morning, Grace. Good to have you all out this morning. And, it's interesting. It kind of hit me about a week ago. I realized today is actually 2 years since we have that we arrived. 2 years since first one. I was like, it has gone quickly. And I don't think half of you were here when we got here. So that's even exciting to be able to see you new as you have been here. But it's just been a privilege. It's such a privilege to be a pastor here. It's a 2 quick years because it's been 2 good years. And so I look forward to 22 more. So amen. Let's hope that happens. So, we're continuing on in Luke here, and we're coming into these last days, right? Last days of Jesus. And actually, we have finally reached the very last day of Jesus' life before where he's going to go to the cross very soon. And, as we're looking at this story, so often if you read good, well-written stories, it's not always just about the main character, is it? It's not just about the main character and what they go through. If you read a good story, you'll find throughout minor characters who play very key roles in understanding and furthering along the plot. They may not be the focus of the story, but their role is important to see the story all the way through to the end. Luke of all Gospels, I think, he has the most interesting, I believe, cast of minor characters that show up. And we're going to see 2 of those today. They come into focus in our passage, and they may be familiar to you, they may not, but it's 2 people, Barabbas and Simon of Cyrene. And together, I think these 2 stories, these 2 men, they help Luke tell us not only what happened to Jesus, but why it happened, and also, I believe, what it means for us as well. I think what we need to do is we need to look into their life stories to see how the tragic day would unfold. It starts with these 2 men. And from their perspectives, I think we can learn from them both. And what we're going to do, actually, we're going to take a little bit of a different route these next 4 weeks. Starting this week, we're going to take 4 weeks to walk through chapter 23, which is his different trials before Pilate and Herod, and then it also goes into his actual crucifixion. But we're going to take 4 weeks to walk through this. I want to kind of give you an idea of Jesus' journey to the cross and what we're going to do. So this first week, we're going to look at kind of the innocence of Jesus and the final denials by the Jewish leadership. Plus, we're going to see the story of 2 substitutes today. So, and then what we're going to do next week is going to be kind of like what we did a couple weeks ago with Passover. We're going to take a step back from Luke to look at some context, laying out a foundation of what is happening. What is it that Jesus' death is accomplishing? We're going to take a look back into Leviticus chapter 16 in the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur, and see what his death accomplished. Then we're going to jump back into Luke chapter 23 to see the actual cross in light of what's going on there. I think you'll see a lot of things start to pop out maybe you didn't see. And then on the 4th week, we're going to jump back out of Luke again to kind of look at the other side of it and see in Hebrews chapters 9 and 10 where the author of Hebrews does a masterful job of taking Yom Kippur and taking Jesus and putting them together and to see ultimately what this accomplished, what his death accomplished. So that's kind of the journey we're going to take for the next 4 weeks, walking through this one chapter. And, I hope that you're ready to take this both devastating yet very necessary journey through. And I hope after you get to the end of it, you're going to see a very big difference in what Jesus' death accomplishes. So if you were with us last week or last couple of weeks, we were in chapter 22. Quite a bit's been going on right on this last day. Jesus had, taken his disciples on the Passover, right? They had come together, they'd, slaughtered the Passover lamb, and they had eaten it as a meal together. And Jesus took, remember, the bread and said, "This is my body." He took the cup and said, "This is the blood of the new covenant." He made a new covenant out of that old day to show a greater reality. And then it goes on to tell 6 different times where his disciples, what did they do? They failed to understand what his words were meaning. And over and over and over, his disciples failed at showing, understanding what Jesus' mission was. And then last week we also saw that Jesus goes on into the garden and he's what? Betrayed, not by an outsider, but by whom? Judas. Someone on the inside betrays Jesus and he's arrested in the garden. And then as Curtis shared with us last week, we saw 3 times his closest disciple, Peter, who denies him 3 times, right? 3 times the one who said, "I'll go with you to death," denies Jesus. But not only did we see 3 denials from Peter, we also saw 3 denials from who? From the leadership of the Jews. 3 times they deny who Jesus was. They deny, first, his role as prophet. Second, they deny his role as Messiah. And third, they quickly deny his role as the Son of God. And not only is it Peter, we often pick on Peter, but it's just everybody else that does the exact same thing. We just don't always see it. Peter gets the bad draw in the story. But what we're going to see today, this kangaroo court has been set up for Jesus. All of these things are starting to take place overnight and into the morning time. And we're going to see the final stages of Jesus' accusation. 3 times, if you note, 3 times Jesus is going to be put on trial before the world. 3 times before the rulers of the non-Jewish nations that are going to come. We see before he comes before Pilate, representing who? Who is Pilate a governor of? Of Rome, the mighty nation. But not only that, he's going to come before Herod. Anybody know what Herod's lineage is? He's not actually Jewish. Huh? Oh, all right. Didn't know that. That's good. Anybody know? It's a relation. He's related. Go all the way back to Genesis. There were 2 brothers. You only have a couple options on this one. Esau and Jacob. He's an Edomite. He is from the line of Esau, which if you know the story, that there's going to be this constant thing. And this man, Herod, has actually set himself up. Tyler, you just went to Israel a couple weeks ago. Herod is known as the great builder. I mean, there was one Herod who's an Edomite. He's going to have relatives. This is a different Herod. There's going to be another Herod in Acts, which is very confusing. But just find yourself a little flow chart and you can figure it out. But you get these guys that create great things. They set themselves up. This Herod had set himself up as the Messiah. Well, what's the problem with being a Jewish Messiah if you're from Edom? You don't really qualify, but he'd set himself up as that, right? You see, this man who sets himself up as a Messiah, his dad had built the temple, all right? The temple that they're at, his dad had built that. His dad had also built Caesarea. He'd also built Masada. So this family is set way up. They have a lot of power. They have a lot of say, a lot of things going on. And then he's going to go back to Pilate a 3rd time. 3 times he's going to be brought before the world, the rulers of the world. But 3 times he's going to be shown by their own lips to be what? Innocent. It's kind of ironic. 3 times innocent of death by the world. Verse 4, we actually see the first time he goes before Pilate. Pilate says what? Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowd, I find no basis for an accusation against this man. Rome says he's not guilty. Verses 14 and 15, we don't actually see it from Herod's mouth here, but by the time he gets back to Pilate, verses 14, you see Pilate says, you brought this man as one who is misleading the people. When I examined him before you, I didn't find this man guilty, looking back to earlier. Nor, he said, so guilty of anything you accuse him of doing. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. So twice now, Rome and now the very brothers of the Jews, the Edomites, have said, not guilty. And now jump ahead, verse 22, right? Yet again, standing before Pilate. And it's kind of crazy. Here you almost see 3 times within the 3 times. He says a 3rd time, he's like, why? What wrong has he done? I have found him guilty of no crime deserving death. 3 times before the world, Jesus is brought and there's no guilt found. What does Luke want you to understand about Jesus? That he is innocent. He's making it very clear to you, right? But you also see 3 times of other people speaking. 3 times the world says he's innocent. 3 times the religious leaders say he's what? Guilty. Look at verse 5. Go back to verse 5, right? When they bring him to Pilate, they're saying about him, they make the accusations. After Pilate says, I find no basis, they say, but they persisted in saying, he incites the people by teaching throughout all of Judea. It started in Galilee and ended up here. They persisted. 1 denial. Look at verse 10. After Herod sends him away, the chief priests and the experts in the law were there. What? Vehemently accusing him. Denial twice. And here's an interesting thing. When they go back to Pilate, it's almost like a 3 within a 3. You notice some 3s going on here? 3 denials by Peter, 3 by the chief priests, 3 things by the Roman ruler, the world leaders, but now you got 3 again by the entire people. There's something going on here. Notice Pilate says he's not guilty the second time, right? And he said to the people, called together the chief priests and leaders of the people, and he said, you brought me this man, right? We don't see anything wrong. I'll have him flogged. Verse 18, they all shouted together, take this man away. Pilate addressed them again in verse 20 because he wanted to release Jesus. But they kept on crying, crucify him. This is the 3rd time, but notice, look, within that 3rd time too, and then he said, a 3rd time he said to them, why? What has he done? I found no guilt. But they were insistent, demanding with loud shouts that he be crucified. 3 times the world says Jesus is innocent, but 3 times the religious leaders say he is guilty. You know, it's interesting. I think it's a fascinating thing that's happening around these trials. Let me ask you, when you have any trial, any good, real trial, what do you often need, especially in a Jewish court, and especially when you're going to try a Jewish person, what do you need and what's required in order to convict somebody? Witnesses, right? Witnesses. Now, it's interesting. You don't have to turn there, but if you want, let me read something from Deuteronomy 19. It's not actually up here. Deuteronomy 19. This is their very own law, the Jews and their very own law. 19, this is dealing with somebody that's deserving of death. Listen to this real quick. A single witness may not testify against another person for any trespass or sin that he commits. So, one witness, why not? Why not have one witness that can condemn you to death? I mean, they can be lying, right? I mean, that's pretty easy, right? One won't do it, but a matter may be legally established only on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. And then it goes on, it says either guilt or innocence, based on multiple witnesses. What's just happened with Jesus based on witnesses between Pilate and Herod? Innocent. Jesus should be what? Released. Based on their own law, 2 witnesses who have identified him and said, not guilty. Based on their own law, he should be released, right? But what were their verdicts? Death. Based on our witnesses, which are actually what? False witnesses. Interestingly, according to Deuteronomy 19, if a false witness brings a murder account, or somebody that should be deserving of death, and it's proven to be false, what's supposed to happen to those people? Anybody? Guess? Death. Hold on to that. Jump back with me if you want. It'll be up here as well. I want you to actually jump back. I think what's going on here a little bit more. We've looked at this before, but Joshua chapter 24. Okay, going back all the way back to Joshua 24. The end of Joshua, what are the people? What have they done? Deuteronomy ends, they're about to do something. Joshua ends, they've already done it. What is that? Crossed over the Jordan into the promised land, right? They've cleared it out. They've conquered it. The land is theirs. Joshua's about to die. And he says to the people, before I go, you need to make a call. Everybody knows this one. Choose what? This day whom you'll serve. That comes from Joshua 24. So he's going to say to them, choose in 14 and 15, obey Yahweh with integrity and loyalty. Put aside other gods. Worship Yahweh. If you have no desire to worship Yahweh, then choose today whom you're going to worship. Whether it be the gods from, this isn't up there, the gods whom your ancestors worshiped beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you're living. But as for me and my family, we will what? Worship, we will serve the Lord. We will worship Yahweh. This is where that comes from. So Joshua is saying to the people, you have a choice before you. Choose Yahweh or choose some other gods. Here it is. It's laid out before you. Which way are you going to choose? And what does he do? He sets up 3 things actually as witnesses against them. One is the law. You have the law, you know it, and the law is going to tell you who God is and how to walk in relationship with him. We looked at that a couple weeks ago. But look at verse 19. He said, let's see here. He says that, the people say, hey, far be it from us to abandon Yahweh so we can worship other gods. But what they do, Joshua comes to them, he says, you will, I just lost my spot here. I'll just tell you what it says. It's earlier. I don't remember. 22, thank you. 22 is the second one. He says, Joshua said to the people, do you agree to be witnesses against yourself? You have chosen to worship Yahweh. So there's the law. The second witness is yourself. And now look here in verse 24. The people said to Joshua, we will worship Yahweh our God and obey him. And that day Joshua drew up an agreement for the people. He established rules and regulations for them in Shechem. He wrote these words on the law scroll of God. He took a large stone and set it under the oak tree near the Yahweh's sanctuary. Joshua said to all the people, look, this stone will be a witness. How many witnesses are against the people whether or not they're going to follow Yahweh? 3. The law, their very selves, and these stones, they're going to cry out against them. He says, look, it will be a witness against you, for it has heard everything Yahweh said to us, and it will be a witness against you if you deny your God. Now, what do the people say? We will worship and obey. We promise. We promise. Heart crossed, But the stone set up, all these 3 things are set up, and they're going to say to go against you if you deny your God. Going back to Luke, what do you see happening in this time? Is that what? What have we just seen with the witnesses? Pilate and Herod witnessing. According to their law, Jesus is innocent. It's testifying against them. According to their own mouths, it's a witness. What they say is a witness against them, right? But what have we been seeing throughout Luke over and over and going all the way back? Remember chapter 19, whenever Jesus was coming in and they start getting on Jesus? Tell your disciples to calm down. What are those people doing? They're testifying, proclaiming a witness to who Jesus is. And he says, if they don't, what will happen? The stones will cry out. The stones will testify. It's interesting. I'm going to put this up here. This is not all of them. Luke actually has a whole lot of stone references if you get into it. I think what in this moment of trial over Jesus, the stones are crying out. They are a witness against the people of Israel. I mean, look here. Like God will raise up children from the stones, command the stones to turn into bread. Angels will keep you from striking your heel against the stone Satan tempts him with. Jerusalem will stone those sent and killed by the prophets. Stone will cry out in judgment. The Pharisees, they feared being stoned, right, by the people for their faults and what they were going to say. Jesus is going to be the cornerstone. He's also the stone that crushes and scatters. Remember, Jesus talks about that whenever there's no stone in the temple that's going to be left unturned. And here later, where is he crucified? He's crucified on a hill that's a stone rocky face called Golgotha, the skull. The stones testify over and over and over to who Jesus is. And we haven't even reached the final stone yet, which is what? Anybody? There's one stone that's going to be placed in somewhere, and it's going to be rolled away to testify to who this man is. So you see these people, they're false witnesses against an innocent man. A man who also happened to be the very same Yahweh whom they claimed to serve all the way back in Joshua. And what do false witnesses deserve? Death. Every stone throughout Luke has been crying out judgment upon the people. And they are guilty, deserving death. But watch what Yahweh is going to do. Watch what Luke does. Watch what Yahweh is going to do despite the guilt of his people. Do not miss this. Look at verse 18. What will Yahweh do in spite of the guilt of his people? When they shouted out, they all shouted out what? We take this man away, release for us Barabbas. We see our very first minor character come into this play in this scene. And what do we know about Barabbas? What do we know about him? We know that he's a what? We know he's a murderer. Not that he's been accused of murder. How do we know he's not just accused of murder? His trial's already been done. His trial's already been set. He's been accused and shown to be a murderer. Not only that, but also a what? Insurrectionist. He's going to go against Rome. Right? His trial's over. His guilt is secure. Now, it's interesting. Anybody know what Barabbas means? Anybody happen to know what that name means? Bar, you might notice that one. Son. Abba is, son of the Father. Hold on to that one for a second. Yes, very good. Son of the Father. Now, it doesn't say it in Luke, but Matthew actually gives him, that's his kind of surname. Anybody know what his given name is? Anybody? I heard it. Who said that? It's Jesus.
That was Barabbas' name?
Yes. Ooh, I like it. Jesus, Barabbas. Jesus, Son of the Father. Give us Jesus, the Son of the Father. Before the people of God stand two men. Two men named Jesus. One, Son of the Father, guilty, a violent murderer. And another Jesus, Son of the Father, who is innocent, who is of peace, who is the bringer of not death, but the bringer of life. And here they stand before the people, two Jesuses, and the question is, which Jesus? Choose this day who you will have. Which Jesus will it be? And they say, give us Barabbas. You're seeing Jesus, the man who sought the lost, who brought those far off near, who showed the people the Father, the true Father, now is hauled off to die the death of a violent criminal. While what? The violent criminal does what? Goes off scot-free. I think they chose the wrong Jesus. But I also think they chose the right Jesus. Because here's the reality. This seems kind of, does this seem unjust? One who is said over and over and over to be innocent. And by the witness of the people, they release the one who's actually guilty. And the innocent is now going to take the punishment of the guilty. This is, in fact, the very climax of Luke. And the whole gospel itself. This is what he has prepared us for all along, coming to this very moment. And I think it's true that all sinners, all rebels, all of humanity are invited to see themselves in the figure of Barabbas. And as we do, I think we discover in this story that Jesus comes to take our place. Jesus comes under condemnation for sins and wickedness, both great and small. And the crazy thing, and why I say it's like, yes, it's the wrong Jesus, but I think it's the right Jesus. Little do they know that I think in the strange justice of God, which overrules the unjust justice of the world and of Rome and every human system out there, God's mercy reaches out where human mercy could not. And in this moment, we see Jesus Yahweh not only sharing, but in this case, substituting for the very sinner's fate. I want that to sit for a second. You know, I think, church, too, it's because of this, what's happening here with Barabbas, I think the call goes out once we realize what Jesus is doing here. For each of us to do what? Take up our cross and follow him. I think this is where our second character comes in. The call of Simon the Cyrene comes in. If you think about it, the previous 24 hours have been quite a merry-go-round for Jesus, right? He's beaten multiple times, he's flogged, he's kept up all night. And if you know that what a criminal, somebody that's guilty of going to be crucified, what are they called to do? It's not, they don't have, the pictures of having the entire cross is not correct, okay, if you ever see that. It's not what they do. But what you would do is you would carry the cross beam that would go, and you would have to carry that on your back and carry it to your own place of condemnation, where they would then come and put you up and set you on to the high beam that would be going this way. But we see in Jesus that he's what? Unable to carry his own cross. And there's this man standing there, Simon of Cyrene, who's pulled in to do that. And if you think, in several occasions in the Gospels, what? Jesus has urged his followers to do what? Take up their cross and follow him. And here at last is someone doing so. And even more, they're not carrying their cross, but they're doing what? Carrying Jesus' cross. And in our story, I think the second substitute happens right here. There was a different Simon, wasn't there? There's a different Simon who said, Jesus, I will go with you all the way to death. I'll carry that for you, and I'll follow you all the way to death. Where is he now? Right now, he's probably off hiding his face, weeping bitterly. He failed to do so, but we see another Simon who will follow. Simon becomes, in this moment, the model of all of those who, in devotion, in holiness, and service, tread behind Jesus on the road to humility, to pain, and death. And I think as we finish this section of Scripture here, I think, though Barabbas and Simon are kind of key to the story, I think we should once more notice one other group of people. Because it's easy sometimes to see ourselves on the outside looking in. And I don't think any of us are Barabbas. In some sense, we should identify him. We should identify ourselves with Simon. But there's another group that we should probably identify ourselves with as well. And who is that? The very crowd that's standing by, shouting out what needs to be done. That's the one I don't like to identify myself with. Sure, I like to be Simon. I'd carry that cross for you, Jesus. I like to be the Barabbas who gets off scot-free even though I was guilty. I like being that guy. I don't quite so much like being identified with the crowds. But I think every one of us should identify ourselves right in the midst of that with sorrow in our identity. You think about these people. Why were they doing it? A week before, what were they shouting as Jesus came in on a donkey? Hosanna to save. He's entering in. This is the king. And not even 1 week later, they're already shouting out, crucify him. Why? Maybe a mixture of disappointment at a failed messianic movement, right? We thought he was going to be the one, and now it's failed. He's going to his death. Crucify him. Get rid of him. Maybe it's the fear. You ever think maybe a little bit of fear of what the Romans might think if they find out that you too were with him? What they might think, the chief priests who you look up to, they regard you as a supporter of the leader of this movement? I think what this did, it drove the mob to make what all of history has regarded as the wrong choice. But look at this, at the same time, Luke was well aware of God's overruling of this too. Why? For the very purpose of our salvation. God turns even human wrath and mistakes into serving his plan. And what we're going to take is 3 more weeks to look at the unfolding of what that plan is. But I want that to sit there for enough today. I want that to sit upon us and think, where do I identify myself as I stand there? And I stand in this picture, in this story. Do you know this substitute, church? Do you recognize your guilt before a holy God? Do you recognize how the one who knew no sin, as Curtis read earlier, became sin so that you and I might become the righteousness of God? I think the choice is laid before you just as it was before the leaders and before the crowd. It's still here today. The choice is still here today. Which Jesus will you choose? Choose you this day whom you will serve. Choose this day whom you will serve. Do not delay. I can tell you, as for me and my house, we will choose to serve Yahweh. We will choose to serve the one who brings Yahweh's salvation. We choose to serve Jesus. Which Jesus will it be? Let's pray.